Let's talk about the top 5 tips for getting started teaching English in Vietnam. So if you want to move to Vietnam, get a job and start teaching English in Vietnam, this video is for you. Teaching English in Vietnam is a great way to travel, earn and make a difference through education. So let's get into the tips. I'm here in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam in the Van Tan Park, which is just across the road from Ninja Teacher's location actually. There's a nice public swimming pool here and a park, a nice pocket of nature to escape the hustle and bustle of the city. So the first tip is to plan ahead. So while a lot of the steps that it takes to start teaching English in Vietnam can go very quickly, such as doing your TEFL certification and actually getting a job, you also want to give yourself sufficient time to prepare everything you need to get started, such as booking accommodation, getting your flight, getting your visa, getting all your documents prepared, which can all take some time. So that's why our program participants often sign up 3 months, 6 months, or even longer in advance so that they can get everything prepared. While it's possible to get started on a tighter timeline than that, you don't want to be in a situation where you're feeling rushed and stressed out about everything that you need to prepare. So as far as possible, I recommend preparing well in advance so that you can get everything ready and aren't stressed out during that process. I just got a fresh coconut here at a little cafe in the park. They've actually renovated it a little bit recently, and it's right here next to the metro line, so there's a new metro stop right over here. It's quite nice, you can get to this park on the metro line now. Anyway, talking of what you need to prepare in advance, one of the most important things is your documents and getting legalized copies made of those documents. These are required by the Vietnamese government in order to work legally in Vietnam, and you need these in order to obtain a work permit and a temporary resident card. It's important to prepare these in advance as these are requirements of the Vietnamese government in order to live and work legally in Vietnam, and it may affect your job prospects if you haven't got these by the time you start applying for jobs. The exact documents required depends on the Vietnamese government's requirements, and these are subject to change, but typically include a bachelor's degree in any subject, a police background check, an initial teaching certification like a TEFL or TESOL certification, a health check, and if you're from a country that the Vietnamese government designates as a non-native English speaking country, then you'll need an English proficiency test as well. These documents also need to be legalized for use in Vietnam, which means they've been verified by the country that issued the document as well as the Vietnamese government. The process of legalizing documents can involve multiple steps, and where and how you do each step depends on your nationality, where the document was issued, as well as where you're currently based. Plus the laws around this and the steps can and do change quite regularly, as is the case with a lot of things in Vietnam. So the exact steps really end up being based on the individual specific case. That's why on our Vietnam TEFL program, included in our pre-arrival support, is document guidance so that we can help identify what exactly it is that you need and help guide you through those steps so that you have all of your documents done correctly. If you're doing it yourself though, make sure you've researched and confirmed the latest correct requirements and you've gone through the process of getting your documents legalized. This will allow you to get started with the job search without experiencing any delays in the process. And then the next tip is to be in country to maximize the chances of getting hired. At Ninja Teacher, we've helped over 1,000 people start teaching English in Vietnam. So I can say with certainty that schools in Vietnam prefer to hire candidates that are currently in country versus those that are overseas. One of the reasons for this is that schools have a fast turnaround time when it comes to hiring, as a lot of the positions are for immediate start dates or within 1 to 2 weeks. So it's often not feasible to hire a candidate overseas and bring them out within that time frame. And I think a lot of schools are also worried about hiring overseas candidates because if someone has never been to Vietnam before, they're not entirely sure if they're going to like it or adjust well. So schools might be worried that this teacher will arrive in Vietnam and then immediately leave the position after they've spent all this time and energy hiring this new person. Versus if they're hiring someone in the country, they know that person has already been here for a little while and likes Vietnam enough that they want to stay and teach here. So what this means is that to maximize the chances of securing a job, you should be in Vietnam at the time that you're sending your resume out to schools. If you've already completed an in-person TEFL course in another country or an online TEFL course, that means you can come to Vietnam and then do interviews while you're here. I get that it might sound daunting to come here without a job lined up. That's what I did when I first came to Vietnam, and there's definitely some uncertainty and fear about that whole process. But that's what I did, and I was able to get work. That's why in our Vietnam TEFL program, we include in-country orientation and support with arriving in Vietnam and getting settled in, which can make that part of the process a lot easier. And then after our 4-week in-person TEFL training course, our program participants are ideally situated in Vietnam to get a job. And that's one of the reasons why we're able to help our program participants secure a job within 30 days of completing the TEFL course, because they're ideally situated in the country. Alternatively, if you feel comfortable with it, you can complete an online TEFL course, such as our online TEFL course that we offer at Ninja Teacher. Complete that from home and then come out and apply for jobs when you're in Vietnam. Which leads me to my next tip, which is not to sign a long-term lease when you first get to Vietnam, and instead wait until you secure a job until you get your long-term apartment. The reason for this is that most cities in Vietnam are quite large, and if you get an apartment in one area of the city but then end up getting a job in another part of the city, you may end up having a very long commute and then end up spending way more time than you would have liked in traffic in Vietnam, which can not be so fun sometimes. If you want to get a good price on an apartment, most landlords will require you to put down a security deposit and sign a 1-year lease, and that will allow you to get a better price, which means if you get a job in a different area of the city and you want to move, you'll lose that security deposit or be stuck with that longer commute. Or you might even get a job offer in a different city, which you might like the idea of, and then again, you will be in the same situation if you have a long-term lease. So it's a good idea to get short-term accommodation when you first get to Vietnam. You can book something like an Airbnb. If you're doing your TEFL training course in Vietnam, then you can do it for the duration of that and the time that it takes to get a job afterwards. Or if you've already done your TEFL certification, you can come out and then stay in the Airbnb until you secure a job and know where you're going to work. After you've got a job, then you can look for apartments. There's lots of good real estate agents in Vietnam who will help you out without charging a fee. And then you can find a nice long-term apartment somewhere near to where you work so you don't have to commute far, or in another area of the city that you really like but you know is within a commutable distance. And then my next tip, and possibly the most important one, is to get practical teaching experience before applying for jobs. This often gets overlooked, but you want to have actual teaching English as a foreign language experience on your resume when you're applying. And while other types of experience, teaching or working with children, can be helpful to have on your resume, specifically teaching English as a foreign language in a classroom setting is really helpful, because that allows employers to see that you know how to teach in a classroom. You may have heard that schools in Vietnam and other countries around the world are willing to hire first-time English teachers, which is true, but with a big caveat. They want the people that they hire as teachers to be able to teach a decent class or as close as possible from day one. They want you as a teacher to take the job, do some onboarding, and then begin teaching straight away. While many schools understand the realities of hiring new teachers and know it will take some time for you to really become a good teacher, they still expect you to have the basic foundational skills and competence in the classroom. Your school might provide some training at the start, but certainly not enough to go from zero to a competent teacher. And that's why TEFL courses and certifications exist. A pre-service teaching certification like a TEFL or TESOL certification should teach you these foundational skills. However, a lot of TEFL courses, especially online TEFL courses, are highly theoretical and actually don't teach you the practical skills needed to be a good teacher. During interviews, schools will often ask you questions about how you would handle specific circumstances in the classroom, and if you don't have actual practical teaching experience, you may not be able to answer that sufficiently to convince the interviewer that you know what you're talking about, which means you might not get the job. So what's the solution to get that practical teaching experience? Well, if you're doing an in-person TEFL training course like our Vietnam TEFL program, then you're going to get a lot of extra practical experience while you're doing your TEFL certification. Our Vietnam TEFL program includes 4 weeks of in-person TEFL training, which goes from Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And that really gives you a chance to learn the practical skills, because you're not just sitting in the classroom listening to your trainer, you're actually practicing the skills as you learn them in a classroom setting. In addition, our program involves 6 hours of observations where you're going out to real schools throughout those 4 weeks and observing teachers so that you can actually see what a TEFL classroom looks like. And once you've done that, then you'll also be doing 6 hours of actual teaching in real schools throughout the 4 weeks. So you'll go into schools, teach real Vietnamese learners in a real classroom setting, and so that gives you real experience teaching in classrooms in Vietnam. Not to mention all the feedback from your trainers on your teaching to help you improve throughout the 4 weeks. So after the 4 weeks, you'll have taught several full classes, and you'll feel confident going into classes in the future, and you'll be able to demonstrate in interviews that you've actually taught real classes and show the interviewer that you know how to teach a real class. So what if your TEFL course doesn't include a teaching practicum? Well, then I highly recommend you go out and get some teaching experience on a volunteering basis. So you could go out and volunteer at a local ESL center or English learning center that is willing to take you on a volunteering basis. Try to take the theoretical knowledge that you've learned from your TEFL and apply it to real life situations, and ideally somewhere you can work for a while to get that experience to put on your resume, because that's going to help you a lot when it comes to getting a job. Our online TEFL course at Ninja Teacher doesn't include a teaching practicum, but it does include lots of examples of video recorded classes so that you can see examples of how to run a good class and then put that into action. It also focuses on helping you create your first lesson plans, which are really important, and once you have those, you can take those out to get that teaching experience. So there are a few examples of how you can get teaching experience on your resume, and that really is the key to getting a teaching job, is having those practical teaching skills and then showing employers that. So those are my 5 tips for getting started teaching English in Vietnam. If you'd like our help with getting started, you can click the link below and go over to ninjateacher.com. And if you'd like to know more about what the experience of teaching English in Vietnam is like, you can watch another video here. It's an interview of one of our TEFL graduates who is teaching English in Vietnam. So give that a watch if you're interested. Subscribe to the channel for more videos, and I'll speak to you soon. Peace.